Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Did Shakespeare. My name is Cassidy Cash. This week we're taking a look at Hamlet and asking the question, is Hamlet a Christmas play? Shakespeare's play Hamlet actually gives us a brief look at how Christmas was celebrated during Shakespeare's lifetime and in 16th century England in particular. It comes in Act 1, Scene 1 of Hamlet when Marcellus, who is Hamlet's friend, who's in on the whole plot of Hamlet trying to convince everyone he's crazy before he kills Claudius. Anyway, going into the backstory of Hamlet is another day. But Marcellus's speech at the beginning of Hamlet gives us a look at what Christmas was like. Here's what he says. Some say that ever, 'gainst that season comes wherein our Saviour's birth is celebrated. The bird of dawning singeth all night long. And then they say, no spirit dare stir abroad, the nights are wholesome, then no planet strike, no fairy takes, nor witch hath power to charm. So hallowed and so gracious is the time. Shakespeare and other Elizabethan poets often use the calendar to talk about what's going on in the play. And Steve Roth argues in his paper, Hamlet as the Christmas Prince, that there are many reasons to think Shakespeare set Hamlet up to be part of the Christmas celebrations. You can see from Marcellus's speech some of the traditions associated with Christmas time. Christmas time is the time to celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ. And so our Savior's birth, with the country being Protestant, they celebrated Christmas time as Christ's birth. And it was thought superstitiously that it was such a hallowed time and such a sacred moment that the normal activity of witches and spirits to impact what was going on in a person's life were put on hold for the Christmas season because it was so hallowed. They were afraid. And so their powers were dead. They couldn't conjure up anything. And the nights were wholesome, meaning everything really was this silent night where things were peaceful and safer than the rest of the time of the year. Steve Roth's paper talks about some specifics, and I want to take you through them because it's just really so much fun for me to think that Hamlet is now going to be part of the Christmas season legitimately. So here we go. The Sentinels' difficulty seeing each other in the opening scene of Hamlet suggests that it was a dark and moonless night. Roth says that it couldn't have been cloudy because Bernardo refers to, quote, yon same star that's westward from the pole in Act 1, Scene 1, and Horatio talks about a red sunrise when he says, quote, the morn in russet mantle clad walks o'er the dew of yon high as eastward hill. Don't try to read that fast. This means that the encounters with the ghost, based on the calendar and the superstitions of the Elizabethan time period, had to have occurred over 4 consecutive nights before November 29th, because they couldn't walk about on November 29th, or after the 25th of December, because right during those days was this hallowed time. He goes on to talk about the Bernardo's star that he says he's able to see and identifies it as the star Deneb. And since it lay, quote, westward from the pole, this means that it was showing up somewhere between October 30th and November 10th in 1601. There are also some convincing parallels between the pattern of relationships of Hamlet and the constellations called Cygnus or the Northern Cross, each of which contains Deneb as its brightest star. Knowing the foundation of stars and astrology in terms of interpreting life and humanity and people and their reputations, that all goes together really well for me in terms of what Shakespeare would have been thinking and what his audience would have been understanding. So all of this seems cool to me. I'm like, yeah, I see that. That makes sense. So he goes on, after he's identified the star, to say that they also looked it up and found out that November 2nd in 1601 was a moonless night, both in London and at Elsinore, which is a real castle in Denmark. You can actually go there. And Elsinore Castle is known as Kronborg Castle in Denmark, but it's the real place that Shakespeare based Elsinore on. So when they say it was a moonless night in London and at Elsinore Castle, they're not being facetious there, Elsinore is an actually identifiable place on a map, and it also had a moonless night that night. Now, Roth goes on to point out what you are probably also thinking, that there is a discrepancy between the Gregorian calendar and the Julian calendar of 16th century England and Denmark, which is offset by 10 days. By the Julian calendar, the moon on November 2nd was full, with all of the spooky ghost-like walking around that full moons carry with their reputation. Naha. So maybe that's why Shakespeare had it happen then. He was in an open-air theater, I'm just saying. The 4 days from October 30th to the 2nd of November in 1601 were, respectively, October 30th is the Feast of Marcellus. That's not an accident. Shakespeare was no fool. Then there's All Hallows Eve, All Saints' Day, and All Souls' Day. So basically, Hamlet is occurring across these four holidays or major feast days in Elizabethan England. And it was a major Elizabethan belief that spirits walked around on All Hallows Eve, and November was commonly associated with death. So if you're looking at this from the United States, you can think about this in terms of all the superstitions and lore that we have attached to Halloween. These are the kinds of superstitions that were going along with All Hallows Eve and All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day as well. It's important to note that having Hamlet occur over October 30th through November 2nd in 1601 does place it across 3 holidays whose whole purpose was to remember the dead. What's also fun is that these holidays are also known for being associated with role reversal. They were celebrated with costumes and masks and revels, inversion of roles, theater performances, play-acted rebellions, and theatrical productions of all sorts. For example, Othello was performed at Whitehall for Hallows Mass, H-A-L-A-M-A-S, Hallows Mass, okay, in 1604, and then The Tempest was performed during the same time of year in 1611, being performed on November 1st. These holidays are all ruled over by the Lord of Misrule. In the production of Hamlet, the misrule at Elsinore Castle begins on All Hallows Eve. So it's a really fun thing to think that this could have been an intentional celebration of Christmas time and all of the themes and superstitions that were going on there for Shakespeare. And you can look at Steve Roth's paper in its entirety, and I recommend that you do that because I've only given you like a few snippets here that were just too tantalizing to keep to myself. And it's brilliant. It's very detailed. It goes into a lot of astrology and constellations and calendars, but it's fascinating. And if you have time with a cup of coffee to sit down and really digest what he's put together there, it makes a convincing case that Hamlet is indeed a Christmas play. So right up there with my favorite holiday films I personally like Lethal Weapon as a Christmas movie. Don't everyone rush the studio at once. Die Hard, also another good Christmas movie. And I like some of the traditional ones of It's a Wonderful Life, but Hamlet, definitely going on my list now. So those are some of the reasons why Hamlet can be considered a Christmas play. If you like this video, please hit like and subscribe. We're here every Saturday with more history about William Shakespeare. And if you are teaching or performing Shakespeare's plays and would like access to an entire library of teaching resources that are free to print and pass out to your students, consider becoming a member of that Shakespeare Life's membership community. Every time I put together an episode like this one or the podcast, That Shakespeare Life, I do so with a whole lot of research. A lot of research goes into every episode we do here at That Shakespeare Life, including this one. And all of my research to public domain images, lists of articles and books and academic articles that I use to make the different references in these. I put them all together into research packets. I've also got maps and guides and ebooks from different information topics that we cover on the show. All of that gets put into a resource library, and it is $30 for a year of access to this. So $30 a year, you get access to everything in my library with my permission and blessing to print it and share it and pass it out to people that you think would benefit from learning something new about William Shakespeare. That's it for this week. I'm Cassie Cash, and I hope you learned something new about the Bard. I'll see you next week. Don't forget to check out the goodies below the video. Bye-bye.